Welcome back. This is the Intel on ENCA. We are briefing you with the intel you need to navigate our complex, robust and loud democracy. And we do this on a need-to-know basis because you do need to know. Before we get on with the show, let's give you a sense of what's happening in the headlines right now. Voting at some polling stations in Camperdown near Pietermaritzburg will be administered by police officers who are trained to do that. This after IEC staff said they fear for their lives. At the same time, the police minister, Begicele, has visited some of the hotspots in KwaZulu-Natal ahead of voting day tomorrow, and he's assured the public that voting will run smoothly. And the Independent Electoral Commission says special votes went well, and they'll give an update this evening about all the preparations for tomorrow. So speaking of the IEC, I will be in conversation shortly with Mawetu Mosari, who is the Deputy CEO of the IEC. But before we get there, I wanted to get this conversation out of the way. I've been promising you that you'll be getting insights from Jan Hubert, a political commentator. He's here with me now, and you've voted. You've done the deed.
I have done the deed. I voted in Drakenstein Ward 4 at the Paul Town Hall. I was the first voter, and it went smoothly. So Drakenstein off to a good start. Interesting municipality. Peter de Villiers, the Springbok coach, the former Springbok coach, is the good candidate to try and unseat the DA in a very, very safe DA municipality.
What's the atmosphere? What is it like, Jan? Is it a hotly contested municipality, or is it one that's safe for the DA, but place it then in context with the entirety of the Western Cape?
Sure. So in the Western Cape tomorrow, we're going to have very interesting times, and these special votes that were cast before the polling opens on Monday, in our municipality, Drakenstein, that's about 11,000 out of about 80,000 voted early, very high percentage. That's going to become important because there's a 90% chance of very heavy rain in the Western Cape tomorrow, which means it's going to be extremely difficult for voters to get out. And what we have seen in the past is that rain favours the DA, or the DA voters go out in the rain, the others less likely to do so. Might well change. Every election has its own story, but historically that's been the case. Now, in the Western Cape, the DA holds almost all municipalities, all but about 5. And a good rule of thumb for tomorrow and our expectations, remember, these are but expectations, millions of people must take their own decision, is that the further away from Cape Town you go, the more difficult it will become for the DA. So the municipalities on the periphery of the province, like Cederberg, Matsikama, like Prince Albert, like, for instance, Oudtshoorn or Bittou, which is Plettenberg Bay. Those we expect to be very closely contested.
Do organizations like ICOSA still feature in the conversation?
By all means. ICOSA currently governs, together with the ANC, the municipality of Kannaland, which is one of the smallest municipalities in the Western Cape. But it makes ICOSA one of only 4 parties in South Africa which can govern a municipality, the others being the ANC, the DA and the IFP.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. And actually, as you say, it does make sense that that's one of the current situation, depending, of course, on what happens in voting tomorrow. Just give me your broad...
That happens in the last local government and national election in Limpopo. We saw in the Vembe district that sort of problem. And that has a massive impact on turnout, which is very bad news for democracy per se, but for the result, not always such an important point, because the ward is still won by the person who gets the most votes.
Yeah. So in terms of managing this election logistically, Jan, there's a factor that I think you want to talk to. We always go for the high-end issues of, voter turnout, are the ballots there in time, the new voter management devices, will they function the way that the IEC has been punting them? And as they say, there's a song actually that says, is it Outcast, the rap group, hip-hop group Outcast? You can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather.
Gospel truth. Politicians might claim that they can do everything and anything, but the weather they cannot do. The weather is from high up. And we will see how that plans out. It seems as though in the rest of the country, the weather will not be as poor as in the Western Cape, which is a great equalizer. You would know, Tulisizwe, that when the sun sets, voting stops in many areas of our country because simply you cannot go out there, especially in rural areas. You cannot walk to the polling station in the dark necessarily. So if the weather is poor during the day, it has an impact in those areas, especially in the former homeland areas. Weather very, very important. And as I said, I think in the Western Cape it's going to be a massive factor.
And then let's talk about what we've been seeing coming out of polling information. Let me, just before we get there, Yan, share with our viewers that the last time ENCA and Ipsos ran this series of polls was for the 2016, well, there was one in 2019, but the one I remember vividly was 2016, right? And we kept saying the ANC is coming in under 50% in the 3 metros, in the big metros. The data kept coming back and saying that. And we took a massive beating from the ANC. They were unhappy. They were so upset, Yan, and they even came to, to lead a march in front of the ENCA offices. But, to Jacob Mamabolo's credit, when the numbers came out and they reflected what Ipsos had been saying all along, he was honest enough to say, his words were, you were giving us a message, we didn't like the message, we shot the messenger. Well, anyway,
well, let's hope nobody shoots nobody and nobody shoots the messenger. I see, for instance, that political parties that are favored by or that look good in the polls that are being published, they quote those polls. Those where they look poor, they say, these polls, they don't really matter. So political parties take them at their word, take us at our word, and let's see whether we get it right this time.
So the overall picture then, with that long interlude that I gave, now the latest coming out of Ipsos is that the ANC consistently trending at under 50%. But there's a good quarter of people who don't know, who can't pinpoint which political party they're going to vote for. Is it this to say that all the hard work, going into these elections, we know that, the ANC had a steep climb, right, with all the problems that they've been beset by over the period of time, and also the track record as it speaks for itself in various municipalities. But they've put in a lot of work. So is this to say they are unlikely to be rewarded for this work?
Elections are won between elections. That's the first thing. I think the other important thing is to remember that this is not a national or a provincial election. So what the ANC does nationally is really neither here nor there. We're looking at 257 elections running at the same time, 44 district councils, 8 metros, 205 municipalities. Each of those is an election in itself. There's a second reason why people must be very loath to take a national view of a municipal election. And that is that if you vote in a metro, you get 2 ballot papers. If you vote outside a metro, you get 3 ballot papers. That means that the rural vote, or even the suburban, Rustenburg, Sasolburg, those areas, those are not rural, but they are not in metros. That vote is weighted. That vote is counted 1.5 times for every metro vote. So it's a nonsense to make a national call on that sort of thing. We have to look at these municipal results, each in its own municipality and in its own right. To have an extrapolated national figure is actually statistically completely unsound.
All right, Yan, let's take a quick break and we'll continue with our conversation. In a moment, we'll be looking at issues such as the likelihood of hung municipalities. I think we had 29, right, the last time?
Something like that.
Thereabouts. What is the likelihood, as well as the conversation around coalitions, but also we will talk about the role of independent candidates, whether or not they will swing or tip the scales one way or another. That's political commentator Yan Uber. He will continue to join me in just a moment in this conversation. I've got a level with you. One of the things that has developed, and I'm choosing to understand it within the context of an IEC that is on the verge of staging these elections tomorrow. Mawetu Mosari, it looks like at this point we are unlikely to have him join us for the conversation. Disappointing from a broadcasting perspective for an interview that had been organized in advance with the IEC. But I'm choosing not to be upset about it or to be funny about it and just say that I'm told he's in a meeting, and I choose to understand that perhaps there really has pressing matters to attend to. And who can blame them with less than, 20 hours to go before polls actually open. So let's leave it at that, and I'll continue my conversation with Yan Uber in just a moment. This is the Intel on ENCA.